The rain had been falling since dawn, steady and cold, turning the cracked pavement outside the auto shop into a slick mirror of gray sky and passing headlights. Inside, the air smelled of oil, rubber, and coffee gone lukewarm in a dented thermos. Eli wiped his hands on a rag already stiff with grease, squinting at the dashboard of a pickup truck that had been giving its owner trouble for weeks. He wasn't much older than 25, but his hands moved with the quiet confidence of someone who'd grown up with wrenches instead of video games. His father had been a mechanic too before the accident, and Eli had spent most of his teenage years under hoods and inside engine bays, learning the language of pistons and belts the way other kids learned algebra. The shop wasn't fancy, just a single bay with peeling paint, a cluttered parts shelf, and a radio that only played static unless you smacked it just right. But it was honest work, and Eli liked that. He didn't fix cars to impress anyone. He did it because when something was broken, it felt wrong to leave it that way. And if someone couldn't pay right away, he'd figure it out. He'd seen too many people stranded, too many families stuck because a brake line gave out or a battery died at the worst possible moment. He remembered his own family's car breaking down the week after his mom got sick, how they'd walked 3 miles in the snow to get her medicine because they couldn't afford a tow. That memory stuck with him, like a burr in his boot. Around 10 that morning, just as the rain started to ease into a drizzle, an old sedan rolled slowly into the lot. It wasn't the kind of car people usually brought in for repairs, more the kind you'd see parked outside a thrift store or a church basement. Rust feathered along the wheel wells, and one headlight was held in place with duct tape. The engine coughed twice, then died completely just past the shop's entrance. Eli looked up from under the hood of the pickup, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his arm. An elderly man stepped out, moving carefully, as if every joint protested the motion. He wore a thin coat that looked like it had seen better decades, and his hands trembled slightly as he fumbled with the door handle. He glanced toward the shop, then back at his car, his expression a mix of exhaustion and quiet panic. Eli dropped his wrench and walked over, boots squelching in the wet gravel. "You okay, sir?" he called out, keeping his voice calm. The man turned, relief flickering in his eyes. "Brakes went out on the highway," he said, voice rough but steady. "I barely made it off the exit. Felt like I was sliding on ice." Eli nodded. "Let's take a look." He popped the hood while the man stood by, arms crossed against the chill. Under the dim light of the overcast sky, Eli could see the brake fluid reservoir was nearly empty. A quick inspection of the lines revealed the problem: a collapsed rubber hose near the rear axle leaking steadily onto the pavement. It wasn't a complicated fix, but it was urgent. Driving like that could have ended badly. "How far you headed?" Eli asked, still crouched beside the wheel. "Just across town," the man said. "Got a doctor's appointment this afternoon." "My wife's been waiting on me." Eli straightened up, brushing dirt from his knees. "I can get this done in about an hour. We've got a spare line in the back." The man's face tightened. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet, its edges frayed from years of use. He opened it slowly, revealing a few crumpled bills and a bus pass. I don't have much," he admitted, not meeting Eli's eyes. "Maybe enough for the bus if the car can't be fixed cheap." Eli didn't hesitate. "Don't worry about that right now," he said gently. "Let me get it running for you." He disappeared into the shop and returned with a replacement brake line, a set of wrenches, and a clean rag. The man offered to help, but Eli waved him off. "You just sit tight. Maybe grab some coffee from the machine inside if it's working." For the next 45 minutes, Eli worked in silence, his movements efficient and sure. Raindrops pattered on the roof of the car, and the occasional truck rumbled past on the nearby road. From time to time, the old man would glance over, watching with quiet gratitude. He didn't say much, but his presence was steady, like an anchor. Across the street, unnoticed by either of them, a man in a dark sedan sat with his window cracked open. He wasn't supposed to be here, not really. Officially, he was on a routine tour of newly acquired service centers, checking on operations, morale, customer flow. Unofficially, he was tired. Tired of spreadsheets, tired of quarterly reports that treated human beings like data points. His company owned dozens of auto shops across the region, but lately customer complaints had been rising. People said the service felt cold, mechanical, like they were just another ticket number. So he'd started visiting shops in plain clothes, watching how things really worked on the ground. And today, something about this little shop caught his eye. Not the building, God knew it needed paint, but the way the young mechanic moved. There was no showmanship, no exaggerated sighs or eye rolls when the old car rolled in, just quiet competence and something else, something harder to name. He watched as Eli tightened the last bolt, then bled the brake system with practiced care. He saw the way the young man refused payment, how he simply said, "Just pass it on when you can," and meant it. The CEO, because that's who he was, felt something shift inside him. It wasn't inspiration, exactly. More like recognition. This was what he'd forgotten. This was the heart of the business he'd built, buried under layers of policy and profit margins. Back at the shop, Eli helped the old man into the driver's seat and walked him through testing the brakes in the lot. The car responded smoothly now. No more spongy pedal, no scary delay. The man rolled down his window, his eyes bright. "Thank you," he said, voice thick. "You don't know what this means." Eli just nodded. "Take it slow for the first few miles. And get that appointment." As the sedan pulled away, tires whispering over wet asphalt, Eli turned back toward the shop, already thinking about the next job. He didn't notice the dark sedan across the street, or the man inside who was writing something in a small notebook. Inside the shop, the radio finally caught a station, some old country song about hard times and second chances. Eli hummed along as he washed his hands at the sink, the water turning brown with grime. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from his sister. "Did you eat?" He smiled. She worried too much, but he didn't mind. After their mom passed, they'd become each other's safety net. He typed back, "Yeah, sandwich at noon. Promise." He didn't know it yet, but his life was about to tilt on its axis. Not because he'd done anything extraordinary, just because he'd done what felt right without expecting anything in return. And sometimes that's enough to change everything. Later that afternoon, as the clouds finally broke and a weak sun peeked through, the CEO drove away from the lot. He didn't head back to headquarters. Instead, he stopped at a diner a few blocks down, ordered black coffee, and sat by the window. He thought about the young mechanic's hands, steady, capable, unassuming. He thought about the old man's gratitude, real and unguarded. And he thought about his own boardroom, where decisions were made based on cost per customer and turnaround time, never on whether someone made it to their doctor's appointment. He pulled out his phone and dialed his assistant. "Cancel my meetings for tomorrow," he said. "I need to go back to that shop on Elm Street and find out everything you can about the mechanic who works the morning shift." By the time he hung up, the coffee had gone cold. But for the first time in months, he felt warm inside. Meanwhile, Eli finished up the last repair of the day, a squeaky belt on a minivan, and locked the shop door behind him. The air smelled fresh after the rain and the streetlights flickered on one by one. He walked to his beat-up hatchback, tossed his toolbox in the back, and drove home through quiet neighborhoods where porch lights glowed like fireflies. He didn't think much about the old man or the repaired car. To him it was just another Tuesday. But somewhere out there, a ripple was spreading, one that would soon circle back to him in ways he couldn't imagine. And that's how it often begins. Not with fanfare or fate, but with a simple choice to help even when no one's watching, especially when no one's watching. A few days after the rainy morning, the shop felt different, not in any obvious way, but in the quiet hum of things. The radio played clearer. Someone had swept the oil stains near the bay door, and there was a new box of gloves by the workbench. Eli didn't think much of it. He figured the owner must have gotten a good deal from a supplier, or finally listened to his nagging about safety gear. He laced up his boots, poured himself a cup of coffee that tasted suspiciously fresh, and got to work on a transmission that had been giving a delivery van trouble for weeks. He didn't notice the man standing just outside the open bay door until he straightened up from under the van, wiping sweat from his forehead. The man wore jeans, work boots, and a plain polo shirt. Nothing fancy, but clean, like he cared how he looked without trying too hard. He wasn't holding a clipboard or wearing a name tag, but there was something about the way he stood. Calm, observant, like he'd seen a lot and wasn't easily rattled. "You, Eli?" the man asked. Eli nodded, wiping his hands on a rag. "Yeah, you need something looked at?" "Not today," the man said, stepping inside. "Mind if I talk to you for a minute?" Eli glanced at the clock. He had another hour before his shift ended, and the van wasn't going anywhere until he finished. "Sure," he said, setting down his wrench. "What's up?" The man introduced himself simply, first name only, and said he worked for the company that had recently bought the shop. Eli tensed slightly. Corporate visits usually meant bad news, budget cuts, new rules, or someone getting let go. He braced himself, but instead of a reprimand, the man said, "I saw what you did last Tuesday, with the older gentleman and his car." Eli blinked. "You were there?" "Across the street," the man admitted. "Didn't mean to spy. I was just observing." There was no judgment in his voice, only sincerity. Eli relaxed a little. "Oh, well, it wasn't a big deal. Car needed a brake line. Guy needed to get to his appointment. Seemed simple enough." "That's exactly why it mattered," the man said. He paused, then added, "Most people would have quoted full price, maybe turned him away if he couldn't pay up front." "You didn't," Eli shrugged. "Wouldn't feel right. My mom used to say, if you can help and don't, it's the same as hurting. Sounds dramatic, but it stuck." The man smiled faintly. "I think your mom was onto something." Then he did something Eli didn't expect. He offered him a chance, not a handout, but an opportunity. Full funding to finish his automotive engineering certification, which Eli had put on hold after his mother got sick. A mentorship program with top technicians in the region. Even a small stipend so he wouldn't have to choose between school and keeping the lights on at home. Eli stood there, grease under his nails, coffee cooling in his hand, and felt the ground shift beneath him. This wasn't just a break, it was a lifeline. His sister was in her second year of community college, and he'd been working double shifts just to keep her enrolled. He'd dreamed of finishing his own certification, but dreams cost money and money was always tight. "Why me?" he asked, voice low. "Because you didn't do it for show," the man said. "You didn't know anyone was watching." That kind of integrity. It's rare, and it's worth investing in. Eli wanted to say yes right then, but something held him back. "What about the shop?" he asked. "We're already short-staffed. If I leave, who covers my shifts? Miguel's got 3 kids and Rosa's saving for her daughter's braces. They can't afford to lose hours." The man looked surprised, then impressed. "You're worried about them?" "Yeah," Eli said simply. "They've got lives too." That quiet loyalty, that instinct to look out for others even when his own path was opening up. That's when the man knew he'd made the right call. He nodded. "We'll figure it out. Maybe adjust schedules, bring in temporary help. Your team won't suffer because you got a chance." Still, Eli asked for a day to think, not because he didn't trust the offer, but because big changes scared him. He'd spent so long holding things together, being the one others leaned on, that the idea of stepping into something new felt like stepping off a cliff. That night, he sat at the kitchen table with his sister. She stirred her tea slowly, listening as he explained everything, the offer, his doubts, the fear that it might be too good to be true. "You deserve this," she said finally, her voice firm. Mom would have been so proud. "I just don't want it to feel like I'm leaving everyone behind," he admitted. "You're not," she said. "You're showing them it's possible to move forward without forgetting where you came from." He slept on it. Woke up early, called the man before his shift started, and said yes. Meanwhile, the elderly man Eli had helped hadn't forgotten either. He'd made it to his appointment, his wife's follow-up after heart surgery, and the doctor said she was doing better than expected. On the bus ride home, he kept thinking about the young mechanic who'd fixed his car without asking for a dime. He'd seen too much selfishness in the world lately. This small act of kindness felt like a reminder that decency still existed. So he did something he hadn't done in years. He went to the local newspaper office, a small brick building downtown with peeling paint and a bell that jingled when you opened the door. He asked to speak to someone about writing a letter. The receptionist, surprised but kind, led him to a young reporter who listened as the man told his story in simple, honest words. A week later, a short piece appeared in the community section. A stranger's kindness on a rainy morning. It didn't mention Eli by name, just a young mechanic at a local shop, but it described the scene vividly. The rain, the broken car, the refusal of payment, the quiet dignity of both men. The reporter, curious, visited the shop. She didn't take photos or push for a dramatic interview. She just watched Eli work for an hour, then asked if he'd mind being quoted. He agreed as long as they didn't make it sound like he was a hero. "I just fixed a car," he told her. "That's what I do." But the story resonated. People shared it online. Local radio mentioned it. A few customers came in specifically asking for the mechanic from the article. At first, Eli felt awkward, like he was being put on display for something that felt ordinary to him. But then he saw how it made others feel. A single mom left a thank you note saying his story gave her hope. An older couple brought him a homemade pie for being a good soul. The attention was strange but not unwelcome. What mattered more was that the shop got busier, not with tire kickers but with real people who trusted them. And that trust felt like something worth protecting. Back at corporate headquarters, the man who'd made the offer, now known to Eli as the company's CEO, watched the ripple effect with quiet satisfaction. He'd expected some buzz, but not this warmth, this genuine connection. He called a meeting with his leadership team. "We're launching a new program," he announced. "One emergency repair per month at cost for anyone in real need. And we're creating a recognition fund, not just bonuses, but real support for employees who go above and beyond." Some executives pushed back. "It'll cut into margins," one said. "People will take advantage," warned another. "Maybe," the CEO replied. "But if we only care about margins, we've already lost." He asked Eli to help design the program, not as a figurehead, but as someone who understood what real need actually looked like. Eli agreed, though he was nervous. He'd never been in a corporate meeting before. But when he sat at that long table surrounded by people in suits, he didn't talk about profit or policy. He talked about the woman who'd walked 3 miles to get her insulin because her alternator died. The teenager who cried when he told her he'd fix her dad's old truck so she could drive to her college interview. The veteran who'd saved for months just to keep his car running. His words landed. Not because they were polished, but because they were true. Still, not everyone was happy. A few longtime managers muttered that Eli was being used for PR. One even suggested the whole thing had been staged. The rainy day, the old man, the CEO, just happening to be there. The rumors reached Eli through a cousin who worked at another shop. He felt a knot form in his stomach. He hated the idea that people thought he'd faked kindness for attention. He mentioned it to the CEO during a planning session. The man didn't get defensive. He just looked him in the eye and said, "If someone thinks kindness is a trick, that says more about them than it does about you." That night, Eli drove home with the windows down, letting the cool evening air clear his head. He thought about how strange life was, how one rainy morning could lead to scholarship offers, newspaper articles, and meetings in glass-walled offices. But at the core of it all, nothing had really changed. He was still the same person who believed a broken thing deserved to be fixed, and a struggling person deserved a hand. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start something bigger. The attention didn't fade, it grew. What started as a quiet newspaper blurb turned into a local news segment, then a short feature on a regional morning show. Eli kept saying no to most interviews, but the ones he did agree to were brief and grounded. He never called himself a hero. He just said he fixed cars, and sometimes that meant helping people, not just engines. That honesty, more than anything, kept the story alive. People weren't just drawn to what he'd done. They were drawn to how normal it felt. Like maybe kindness wasn't rare. Maybe it was just quiet and most folks just needed a reminder. But with attention came pressure. Customers started showing up not just for repairs, but to meet the guy from the news. Some brought gifts, homemade cookies, handwritten notes, even a framed photo of their dog with a thank you message taped to the back. Others expected special treatment, as if his act of generosity meant he owed them something. One man argued loudly when Eli quoted him full price for a routine oil change, saying, "I thought you helped people who couldn't pay." Eli stayed calm. "I do," he said, "but you can, and fair's fair." Still, the strain began to show. He'd always worked hard, but now every interaction felt loaded, with expectation, with judgment, with the weight of being seen. His co-workers were supportive, but he could tell some of them were uneasy. Not jealous exactly, but confused, like they didn't know how to act around him anymore. Even his usual banter with Miguel over lunch felt stilted, like they were both tiptoeing around something neither wanted to name. At home, his sister noticed the change. "You're quieter," she said one evening, stirring a pot of soup on the stove. "Like you're carrying something." He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "It's just weird. People look at me like I'm supposed to be someone else now. Like I'm not allowed to have a bad day or say no." She turned off the burner and faced him. "Then stop trying to be what they want. Be who you are. That's what got you here in the first place." Her words stuck with him, but it was easier said than done. Meanwhile, the company's new community care initiative was rolling out faster than anyone expected. Pilot programs launched in 5 cities, with Eli consulting on everything from eligibility guidelines to how technicians should talk to customers in distress. He insisted on small but meaningful details. No paperwork at the counter, no public announcements when someone received help, no photos unless the customer gave clear written consent. Dignity matters as much as the repair, he told the team during one planning call. If someone's already embarrassed about needing help, we don't make it worse by turning it into a show. The CEO listened. And more importantly, he acted. Training modules were rewritten. Managers were retrained. A small emergency fund was set up, seeded with company money but managed locally so decisions could be made fast, without corporate red tape. But not everyone welcomed the shift. In a staff meeting at one of the larger regional hubs, a longtime service manager stood up and said, "This feels like charity, not business. We're not a nonprofit." The room went quiet. The CEO, who happened to be visiting that location that day, didn't raise his voice. He just said, "We're in the business of trust. And trust isn't built by turning people away when they're at their lowest. If that feels like charity to you, maybe you're in the wrong line of work." After that, the grumbling quieted, but it didn't disappear. Eli heard whispers during a training session in another city. "He's the golden boy now. Must be nice to skip the line." He let it roll off his back mostly, but sometimes late at night it got under his skin. Was he being used? Was this all just a feel-good campaign that would vanish once the headlines dried up? He almost walked away once. Not from the program, he believed in that, but from the spotlight. He told the CEO as much during a quiet conversation in a hotel lobby after a long day of meetings. "I didn't do what I did for this," he said, gesturing vaguely at the folder of press clippings the PR team had handed him. "I just wanted to fix a car." The CEO nodded. "I know. And you don't have to keep doing this if it's hurting you. But think about the people who'll get help because of what you started. That's real. That's lasting." Eli went home that weekend and didn't answer his phone. He spent Saturday helping his neighbor replace a water heater, Sunday driving his sister to her internship. Normal things. Grounding things. By Monday, he felt steadier. Then, one Tuesday morning, he found a folded piece of paper tucked under the windshield wiper of his car. It wasn't taped down or sealed, just a plain white sheet slightly damp from the morning dew. He opened it carefully. "You didn't just fix my car that day. You reminded me that goodness still walks this earth. Don't let anyone make you doubt that you belong among them." No signature, but he knew instantly who it was from. He stood there in the parking lot, the note trembling slightly in his hand. The words weren't grand or poetic. They were simple, human, and they hit him right in the chest. He folded the note back up and put it in his glove box, right next to his registration and the spare key he kept for his sister. Not as a trophy, but as a compass. The next day, he returned to the training center with a new clarity. He wasn't a symbol. He wasn't a marketing tool. He was just a mechanic who believed people mattered. And now he had a chance to make sure that belief shaped how an entire company treated its customers. He began speaking more openly in meetings, not with polished speeches, but with stories. The single dad who'd sold his guitar to pay for a timing belt. The elderly woman who'd been scammed by another shop and came in terrified to trust anyone again. "We're not just fixing metal," he told a room full of new hires. "We're fixing peace of mind, and that's worth doing right." Slowly, the culture began to shift. Technicians started sharing their own stories, times they'd stayed late to help a stranded driver or used their own tools to get someone home safely. The initiative wasn't perfect, but it was real. And because it was real, it spread. Back at his original shop, things settled into a new rhythm. The extra customers brought in more work, which meant more hours for everyone. Rosa got her daughter's braces. Miguel bought a used bike for his youngest, and Eli? He kept working his shifts when he could, even as his training schedule grew. He didn't want to disappear completely. This place, with its oil-stained floor and flickering fluorescent lights, was where he'd learned who he was. He wasn't going to leave it behind just because his path had widened. One afternoon, a young woman came in with a sputtering hatchback and tired eyes. She explained she was a nursing student, working nights, and her car was the only thing keeping her in school. The starter was shot. She had $80 to her name. Eli didn't hesitate. We'll get you back on the road, he said. And don't worry about the bill today. As he worked, he thought about how full circle it felt. He wasn't just receiving kindness anymore. He was passing it on exactly as he'd promised that rainy morning. And this time, he didn't feel burdened by it. He felt honored. The CEO watched from a distance, not intruding, just observing. He saw how Eli handled the interaction. No fanfare, no camera, just quiet competence and care. Later, he sent a message to his leadership team. This is the standard, not the press release. This. In the weeks that followed, the Community Care Initiative expanded to 20 more locations. Local news outlets covered it, but this time the focus wasn't on one person. It was on the system, the choice to build kindness into the business model. And at the heart of it all was a simple idea. That service isn't just about what you fix, but how you make people feel. Eli still got nervous before big meetings. He still preferred wrenches to PowerPoint slides. But he'd stopped apologizing for who he was. He'd realized that his strength wasn't in being perfect, it was in being present. In showing up day after day, for people who needed someone to believe in them. And maybe, just maybe, that was the most powerful kind of leadership there was. The program was working, better than anyone had expected. Shops across the region were reporting fewer complaints, higher customer loyalty, and even a bump in employee morale. Technicians said they felt proud again, like they were part of something that mattered. But with growth came growing pains. New locations meant new people, and not everyone understood the spirit behind the initiative. Some managers treated it like a quota to fill, others used it as leverage. We helped you, so you should leave a 5-star review. Eli heard about it through the grapevine, and it made his stomach twist. He'd always believed that kindness shouldn't come with strings. The moment you attach conditions, it stops being kindness and starts being a transaction. So he started visiting the newer shops, not as a corporate rep, but as a fellow mechanic. He'd show up in coveralls, asked to shadow a shift, and just listen. He didn't lecture. He asked questions. What's the hardest part about offering help when someone's struggling? How do you know when to step in? What would make this feel more human? The answers surprised him. One young technician in a small town confessed he'd been afraid to offer a discount because his manager docked points for unapproved write-offs. Another said customers assumed they were being scammed if the repair was too cheap. They think there's a catch, she said, wiping her hands on a rag. Like we're going to bill them later or something. Eli realized the problem wasn't just policy, it was trust. On both sides. People had been burned too many times by businesses that talked a good game, but only cared about the bottom line. And employees had been trained to see every exception as a risk, not a chance to do right. So he went back to the drawing board with the CEO. They simplified the guidelines even more. No forms. No approvals needed for basic emergency repairs under a certain cost. Just a quick note in the system, customer in need, repaired under community care. And they added a new rule. No asking for reviews, no photos, no public acknowledgement unless the customer brought it up first. It's not about credit, Eli told a group of regional managers during a training session. It's about connection. If someone walks out feeling respected, they'll tell 10 people. That's better than any ad. Not everyone bought in right away, but slowly the tone began to shift. Shops that embraced the spirit of the program saw repeat customers, referrals, even thank you letters left in suggestion boxes. One location in a rural town started offering free safety checks for seniors every first Saturday of the month. Another partnered with a local shelter to provide discounted repairs for job seekers. The initiative wasn't just surviving, it was spreading roots. But while the program grew, Eli struggled with his own place in it. He'd finished his certification and was now leading a small pilot team, traveling to different cities to train staff. He liked the work, but he missed the rhythm of the shop. The smell of oil, the clink of tools, the quiet satisfaction of solving a problem with his own 2 hands. On the road, everything felt temporary. Hotel rooms, conference rooms, airport coffee. He'd call his sister every night just to hear a familiar voice. One evening, after a long day of workshops in a city he'd never been to before, he sat on the edge of his hotel bed staring at his phone. A notification popped up, a local news alert. His heart jumped. Had something gone wrong? Was there another rumor? But it wasn't bad news. It was a short article titled, "How One Act of Kindness Sparked a Movement." It didn't focus on him. Instead, it told the story of a single mother in another state, whose car had broken down on the way to a job interview. A technician at a shop she'd never been to before fixed her starter on the spot. No charge, no questions. She got the job, and when she asked how to repay him, he just said, "Help someone else when you can." The article mentioned the community care initiative briefly, but the real focus was on the chain reaction. How one small choice had rippled outward, touching lives the original mechanic would never meet. Eli read it twice. Then he leaned back against the headboard and let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. For the first time in months, he didn't feel like he was carrying the weight of the whole thing. He was just one link in a much longer chain. The next morning, he walked into the training center with a lighter step. He didn't talk about metrics or brand image. He told the story from the article. "This," he said, tapping the printout, "is why we're here. Not for headlines, not for praise, but so someone somewhere doesn't have to choose between a job and a broken car." The room was quiet. Then one technician raised his hand. "My uncle got help like that last year," he said. He was about to lose his apartment because his van died. The shop fixed it for parts cost. He still talks about it like it saved his life. Others started sharing too. A woman whose grandmother was driven home by a mechanic after her brakes failed. A teenager who got his first job at a shop because someone saw potential in him, not just his resume. Eli listened, and for the first time, he felt like he wasn't alone. Back home, his sister had started volunteering at a community center, teaching basic car maintenance to women who'd been through tough times. "You inspired me," she told him over dinner one night. "If you can change how a whole company treats people, I figured I could at least teach someone how to check their oil." He smiled. "You're doing more than that. You're giving them control." "That's huge," she shrugged. "Just passing it on." Those words, "just passing it on," had become a quiet mantra, repeated in shops, in training rooms, even in customer service calls. It wasn't a slogan. It was a promise. But not all the attention was positive. A competitor company released a statement calling the initiative a publicity stunt disguised as charity. An online forum buzzed with skeptics. "They're just trying to look good after years of overcharging." "Bet they're still making a profit off it," Eli saw the comments. They stung, but not as much as they used to. He'd learned that you couldn't control what people thought, but you could control what you did. So he kept showing up, kept listening, kept fixing what was broken, both in cars and in systems. One afternoon, while visiting a shop in a struggling neighborhood, he met a young apprentice who'd grown up just a few blocks away. The kid was sharp, knew engines better than some veterans, but he'd almost dropped out of trade school because he couldn't afford tools. The shop had hired him anyway, lent him a starter kit, and paired him with a mentor. "You remind me of someone," the kid said shyly, handing Eli a wrench. "Yeah?" Eli asked. "Yeah, the guy from that story, the one who helped the old man in the rain." Eli looked at him. "That was me." The kid's eyes widened. Then he grinned. "No way. I applied here because of that. I wanted to work somewhere that, cared." Eli clapped him on the shoulder. "Then you're in the right place. And hey, keep that wrench. Consider it your first tool." The kid's face lit up like he'd been handed gold. Later, as Eli drove back to his hotel, he thought about how far things had come. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about the apprentice, the single mom, the technician who stayed late to help a stranger. It was about ordinary people choosing to do the right thing, even when no one was watching. And maybe that was the real victory. Not the program, not the press, but the quiet shift in how people saw each other, not as customers or employees, but as neighbors, as humans. He pulled over at a gas station, bought a coffee, and called his sister. "Hey," he said when she answered. "Remember that old toolbox Dad left us? The dented green one?" "Yeah, I think it's time I gave it to that kid I told you about." She laughed softly. "Dad would have liked that." Eli smiled into the phone. "Yeah, I think he would." The road ahead was still long. There would be setbacks, doubts, days when it all felt too heavy. But for now, in the fading light of a quiet evening, he felt something simple and true. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not because he was special, but because he'd stayed honest. And that honesty had opened a door not just for him, but for others too. And sometimes that's enough. A year had passed since that rainy morning, and the world hadn't changed overnight, but something had shifted quietly, like the slow turn of seasons. The Community Care Initiative was now active in over 200 locations, not because of a corporate mandate, but because technicians themselves had asked for it. They'd seen how it changed the way customers looked at them, not as salespeople, but as neighbors who could be trusted. And that trust, once earned, was worth more than any upsell. Eli stood at the back of a training room in a city he'd visited 3 times before, watching a group of new hires run through a role-play scenario. One played a single parent whose transmission had failed the day before payday. Another played the service advisor, practicing how to offer help without making the customer feel pitied. The words were simple. "We can get you back on the road today. No pressure. Just tell us what you need." It wasn't perfect. Sometimes the tone was too stiff, the phrasing too rehearsed, but the intent was there, and that was what mattered. After the session, a young woman hung back. She looked nervous, twisting a pen between her fingers. "Can I ask you something?" she said when the others had left. "Sure," Eli said, leaning against a workbench. "I read about what you did, the old man, the breaks, and I almost didn't apply here. I thought places like this didn't really exist, that it was all just marketing." Eli nodded. "I get that. I used to think the same thing about a lot of companies. But it's real," she said, her voice softening. "People actually care. Not everyone," he admitted, "but enough do, and that's what keeps it going." She smiled then, a real one, and walked out with her head a little higher. Later that evening, Eli met the CEO for dinner at a small family-run diner. No fancy restaurant, just good food and quiet booths. They hadn't seen each other in person for months, both pulled in different directions by the growth of the program. But tonight there was no agenda, no presentation to review. Just 2 people who'd been changed by the same moment sharing a meal. "You look tired," the CEO said after the waitress left with their orders. Eli chuckled. "Feels like I live in airports now." "But you're still doing it." "Yeah," Eli said, stirring his iced tea. "Because it's working. Not perfectly, but it's real. And when it's real, people feel it." The CEO was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know, I used to think leadership was about vision, big ideas, bold moves. But watching you, I realized it's about presence. Showing up, listening, letting people know they're seen." Eli looked up, surprised. "I'm just a mechanic." "And that's why it worked," the CEO said. "You weren't trying to build a brand. You were just being human, and that's something no marketing team can fake." Their food arrived, meatloaf for the CEO, chicken fried steak for Eli, and they ate in comfortable silence for a while. Outside, the city hummed with evening traffic, streetlights casting long shadows on wet pavement. It reminded Eli of that first morning, the rain, the old car, the trembling hands of a stranger who just needed someone to care. "Do you ever miss the shop?" the CEO asked finally. "Every day," Eli admitted. "But I don't think I'd be helping as many people if I stayed there. This way, it's like I'm still fixing cars, just in a different way." The CEO nodded. "You've changed how we think about service. Not as a transaction, but as a relationship." They talked late into the night, not about strategy or expansion, but about people. The veteran who'd gotten his truck fixed so he could drive to his grandson's graduation. The teenager who'd landed a job at a shop because someone believed in her. The elderly couple who'd written a letter saying they finally felt safe on the road again. None of it was flashy. None of it would make a viral video. But together it added up to something lasting. Back home a week later, Eli walked into his old shop for the first time in months. Nothing had changed. The same oil stains on the floor, the same radio playing static until you smacked it. But everything felt different. He wasn't just an employee anymore. He was part of something bigger, and yet standing there, he felt like he'd come full circle. Miguel saw him first. "Look who finally remembered where he lives," he called out, grinning. Rosa threw a clean rag at him. "Don't encourage him. He'll start thinking he's still on the schedule." Eli laughed, the sound easy and familiar. He spent the afternoon helping with a stubborn fuel pump, his hands remembering the rhythms of the bay like an old song. No one treated him like a celebrity. They just treated him like Eli, same as always. Before he left, the shop owner handed him an envelope. "From the old man," he said. "Came by last week. Said to give it to you when you showed up." Eli opened it later in his car. Inside was a photo, slightly faded, taken on a sunny day outside a clinic. The elderly man stood beside his wife, both of them smiling, her arm looped through his. On the back, in neat handwriting, "We made it. Thank you for giving us more time." Eli tucked the photo into his glove box right next to the note from months ago. 2 small pieces of paper, holding more weight than any award. That weekend, he drove out to the overlook where he used to work on cars with his uncle as a kid. The view was the same: rolling hills, distant highway, the sky wide and open. He sat on the hood of his car, engine off, and just breathed. No emails, no meetings. Just quiet. His phone buzzed. A message from the apprentice in the struggling neighborhood. "Got my first solo repair today." Customer cried when I told her it was covered. Said she hadn't been treated kindly in years. "Feels good to be part of this." Eli smiled and typed back, "Just passing it on." He didn't know what came next. Maybe he'd go back to running a shop one day. Maybe he'd keep training others. Or maybe he'd find a new way to serve that he hadn't imagined yet. But he wasn't in a rush. He'd learned that real change doesn't happen in headlines, it happens in moments. A wrench turned. A hand offered. A choice to care when it would have been easier not to. And somewhere, in 100 different towns, other mechanics were making that same choice. Without cameras. Without applause, just because it was right. The CEO, back in his office, pinned a new note to his bulletin board. It was a printout of a customer review from a shop in Montana. "My car broke down in the snow. They didn't just fix it, they gave me a blanket, a hot drink, and drove me to my hotel. No one's ever treated me like that before." He didn't add it for the praise. He added it as a reminder. This was the heart of the business. Not profit margins or market share, but people helping people. Months later, at the company's annual gathering, the CEO stood before hundreds of employees and said something no one expected. "We're not here to sell repairs," he said. "We're here to restore trust. And that starts with how we treat each other and the strangers who walk through our doors." Then he stepped aside, and Eli took the stage, not to give a speech, but to introduce a panel of technicians from different states, each sharing their own stories of quiet kindness. No scripts, no edits, just truth. Afterward, a young technician pulled Eli aside. "I saw your story," he said. "That's why I applied here." Eli clapped him on the shoulder. "Then you're already part of it." The story didn't end with a promotion, a grand title, or a viral moment. It ended the way it began, with ordinary people choosing to do the right thing even when no one was watching. And sometimes that's enough to change everything, because kindness isn't a campaign, it's a practice. And when enough people practice it, the world gets a little softer, a little kinder, one repaired car, and one restored heart at a time.